I want to say ETM Hotep. First order of business is I want to double check and make sure that my audio and the video is clear. So I want to say dua for anyone who is tuned in right now. If you can let me know in the chat, let me know if my audio is clear and video is clear, and then we can proceed. All right, so everyone is saying that I can be heard, and I appreciate that. And let me make sure I turn off of my notifications. In the meantime, again, I want to say dua. I thank anyone who is tuned in. The purpose of me doing this video is to archive and have a place where people can make a reference on this subject matter. So tonight's subject is the feminine plural and graphic transposition in ancient Egyptian. And I am still muting these notifications. So before we begin, I want to welcome those who have tuned in and share the video. All right. I was going to do this on Facebook, but I decided to do this on YouTube for the sake of direct archiving of this video. All right. So again, the subject or the topic is the feminine plural and graphic transposition in ancient Egyptian. All right. So I want to allow a little bit more time for those who will be tuning in to tune in before I begin. For those who are watching it live, I will be monitoring the comments. Well, actually, if you have any questions, as I'm talking, you may want to write them down and reserve it until I can pay attention to the comments once I'm finished, and then I'll entertain all of the comments in the chat. All right. If you have any questions for me, I know how to chat. I know how the chat goes. People are talking to each other as well. But just to let you know, I'll pay attention and check the chat once I get going into this discussion. All right. So tonight's discussion is I'll be brief as possible, but I don't want to skip over anything. So it'll be a blend between the two. But the title is the feminine plural and graphic transposition. Now, first, let me give a little backdrop on why this is even a topic to begin with, in terms of why now. Because the feminine plural and graphic transposition, these are features within the ancient Egyptian language that we refer to by its name, Rani Kemet. All right. Also, you'll hear us say Sesh Medu Necher. Sesh Medu Necher is the name of the writing system that people call hieroglyphs or hieroglyphic. And Rani Kemet is the name of the spoken language. All right. The actual word Rani Kemet breaks down as Ra, which is mouth, and Ni Kemet is of Kemet. All right. So it's literally the mouth of Kemet, but it's used as an idiom for language, that which comes forth from the mouth. All right. So now, like I said, like I said, these are subjects that are discussed within, a discussion about the language. When people learn the language, whether it's on a beginner's level, you learn about the feminine plural. Actually, learn about gender and number in general, which will be masculine and feminine. You have your singular, and then you have your plural, and then you have your dual. All right. You also learn about graphic transposition at a beginner's level when you actually take a course in the language. So the question is, why now? Why discuss it now? So I just want to give a backdrop of this discussion. So this is what sparked the most recent discussion. Now, before I move forward, recently, as of a week and a few days ago, the brothers Asar Imhotep, who's known as Harold Johnson on Facebook, and Netter Neb had a discussion on the meaning of Kemet, the name that we affectionately call the ancient Egyptian kingdom or country or state, Kemet. And so ever since that discussion, there's been some branch offs in that discussion. And so when we discuss the feminine plural and the graphic transposition, that is a result of a spinoff from that particular discussion. Now, a lot of people ask me what is my opinion, or what is my stance on the topic question of whether or not the word Kemet in the name of the country of ancient Kemet, does that word mean black people? And I've said this for years. I've said it recently during the discussion, before the discussion, during the discussion, and after the discussion. And I'll say it now, that there's absolutely no debate at all. The reason why is because the word Kemet as a name for the country or the kingdom or the polity, it is a toponym. It is a place name. It is a location. And at no time ever on the planet Earth, yesterday, today, or tomorrow, will toponyms ever refer or describe people. Toponyms refer and describe places, not people. That's why they're called toponyms. It comes from the Greek words topos, which means place, and onym, which means name, a place name. There was never a debate about that. The only reason why people even imagine that there can be a debate about that is because they're stuck in a paradigm of a few decades ago when there was a huge push by us, and I use that in quotes, to prove that the ancient Egyptians were actually black Africans, as opposed to what was being pushed back then, that the ancient Egyptians were a product of West Asia or even Europeans. So there was a thrust, a push to prove that the ancient Egyptians were indeed black and they were African. So the name Kemet was propagated to mean the land of the blacks. And so at that time, we were trying to prove that the ancient Egyptians were black Africans by any means necessary. All right. So as we know now, that is pure propaganda. We don't need to propagate the misinformation that a toponym refers to people and that it means black people. With the information that we have, we know that the ancient Egyptians were what we will call today black Africans. We don't need to misinform the public about the name of the kingdom in order to show that. There's a mountain of evidence that shows that. That's not even debated at this point in time anymore. That's why I say stuck. People are stuck there. So that's my stance on that. It was never a debate. I would never try to debate anybody on that. It's nonsensical. Toponyms never refer to people. They never refer to or describe people. Now, as I did a whole video on toponyms, so I'm not going to go into it tonight, but that's my stance. The pushback that people may give me on that is that, well, what about the place names that are named after people? Those are called eponymic toponyms. The word eponym means to name after a person. And so an eponymic toponym is a place that's named after a person. Regardless, the name, even if it's named after a person, it refers to and describes a place. That's why we say eponymic toponym. A toponym that's named after a person. For example, Mount Everest is named after a man whose last name is Everest. But it is a mountain. It is a location. It's not a description of him. It's not referring to him. It's referring to a mountain. It's referring to a location. Just about every major city in the United States has a Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard or Malcolm X Street or Malcolm X Boulevard. Those names are named after men, but they're not describing or referring to those men. They're referring to streets. They're referring to a location on a map. They're referring to places. The Kennedy Space Center, named after Kennedy. It's not referring to Kennedy. It's not trying to describe Kennedy. It's named after him, but it's a place. It's a building. Okay? That is just without getting into any linguistics or anything. That is just common, should be common knowledge at this point. All right? So I'll just stress that to get that out the way. So now, in that discussion afterwards, I had posted this particular picture on Facebook, and this is what sparked the conversation that we're having tonight about the feminine plural. And so as you can see, what you see, these glyphs here on the screen, is the word Kemet. And it means a nation of the riparian country. All right. And so what I said is that whenever you see the word above transliterated as Kemtu or Kemetu, it is done in error. The brother Netaneb is one of the people that mistransliterates this as KMTW. And he does so in error. So I say the above word is a feminine singular collective and is properly transliterated as Kemet. If it were a feminine plural, it would be transliterated as Kimwut, where the WT ending denotes feminine plural and not TW. Gender and number are grammatical features taught on a beginner's level of the language. And so here are some more examples of the masculine and feminine collective. So to show that there is consistency, we have a word called Masha, which means the army or the troop. This is masculine. Now, what confuses beginners or those who are not familiar with the grammar or the language, or maybe just learning, is that you hear about these three strokes. And these three strokes are said by some to mean plural. And so that could be misleading to a beginner because the three strokes do not always denote plurality. It is an assumption and a general assumption that people make that when you see these strokes that it's automatically plural, and that is not the case. And you learn that if you take an actual course. This is something that is explained. All right. But those who may not go through a course or who may not finish courses, they may have be mistaken and continue to assume that the three strokes are always plural. And so this is what confuses people. So here are two examples. We have Masha, the troop. It's called a collective because collective words or collective substantives are words that treat many things as one unit, a group of things, a group. So the troop of the army. The reason why it is singular is because it is treated as singular syntactically, which means that in sentences, this will reflect in the singular. All right. That's masculine, and this is feminine on the right. We have a word minminet, which means the herd of bulls, the herd of cattle. This is feminine. Although you see the three strokes, this is treated as a singular. Why? Because it's a collective. It's treating a group of things or many things as one unit or one thing, one item. All right. So this is what I posted up, which sparks the conversation about the feminine. So it is of the opinion of Nedenev as well as Dr. Clyde Winters is that the feminine plural is represented by putting a W on the end of words, and they're just wrong. All right. So we're going to just go into show that. Here's another example of something that I posted on Facebook. So here is an example of this word here actually being used in a text. All right. We always have to remember that context dictates meaning. In other words, how a word is used will dictate its meaning and its function. Words in total isolation are you have very little information. So here's an example of the word being used in an actual sentence, in an actual text. And this text is coming from the hymn of Senwasoret III. This is coming from plate 3, line number 5. All right. You can see the glyphs here at the top. You see the word in question here right in the middle. And you see the transliteration beneath it. And then the translation beneath that. So I'll read the translation. It says, he came, E and F. This first group of glyphs here. He came, past tense. Sa'unk in F. He caused to live. What? Kemet. He caused the nation of Kemet to live. Chesser in F. He dispelled, past tense. What? Shenenu, S. Its afflictions. So what I have here is an arrow pointed to this pronominal suffix, S. And so the pronominal suffix on the word shenenu is a third person feminine singular pronoun. It anaphorically refers back to its antecedent, which is the word kemet, and agrees with it in gender and number, which is a feminine singular. So this pronoun here, this S here, is a third person feminine singular, matching what it's referring to, which is this word here, kemet, which has to also be a feminine singular. They have to agree. And in linguistics, we call this concordance, where words are matching in gender and number. This process where a word will refer back to something is called anaphora. And so this pronoun is anaphorically referring back to a word which is itself called an antecedent, which means that which comes before. And so this third person feminine singular pronoun is referring back to the word kemet. This is how we confirm syntactically whether a word is masculine, feminine, singular, dual, or plural. All right. So this is something that I posted on Facebook as well. All right. Now, to go back to these words here, remember I said that these words here, masha, is a masculine collective noun. Even though it's talking about many things, but it's treating that many things as one, the army. The herd, feminine singular, or collective. So what if they were, how do we know that these are singular, masculine, and singular feminine? Well, likewise, in this example, we know it because of the same thing I just explained. We're speaking about anaphora again. We have masha, pen. The word pen is a demonstrative. Demonstratives are words that point out things. And in English, our demonstratives is this or that. This book, that book. This bicycle, that car. Those are demonstratives. So in ancient Egyptian, we have demonstratives as well. Masha, pen. This demonstrative pen is masculine singular. Masha, pen, this army. In the feminine, the demonstrative would be 10. This herd. Notice that the P is for masculine and the T would be for feminine. The only difference. Pen and 10. All right, so again, this forms agreement. This is how we know that it's singular. Now, if it were to be plural, what will we see? This is what we would see if it was plural. So here are some examples of plural. So we have a word, awet. This word is awet-e, which means my limbs. Notice that the arms, awet-e, my limbs. Then we have the demonstrative, ipten. See 10 on here, feminine, but it's feminine plural. Why? Because the word awet is plural. You have the ending, WT, awet. My limbs, these. Now in English, we don't talk like that. We would say these limbs of mine. This is how we would translate that. Awet, awet-e, ipten. You can find this attested inside of the papyrus here at the British Museum. That's the number, the column, and the line. All right, if you want to take a chance to look into that. Another example, chasut, ipten. Same thing, both of these words are feminine. Why and how do we know? Because they end in ipten. The demonstrative is feminine and it's plural. So we have chasut ipten, which means these foreign countries. Chasut is foreign countries. Ipten is these, the demonstrative. These foreign lands or foreign countries. Notice the WT. I want to point out something. When people, including Dr. Clyde Winters and including the brother Netterneb, when they pronounce foreign lands, they say kasut, not realizing that that is contradictory to what they are misleading others into thinking that the plural for feminine words ends with TW as opposed to WT. They will pronounce this as kasut. They don't pronounce it as kastu. According to their logic on feminine plural endings, it should be chestu or kastu. They don't pronounce it that way. So that shows and confirms that they're not on the same page within their own minds, that this is all new. All right. So this particular example, you can find it in the text of Egypt Antiquity, page 25, line number 9. All right. So in the masculine plural, it would be ipin. You have the P there, ipin. Plural for feminine, it would be ipten. That should be ipten. All right. So we have the pen and the 10. And this is what you receive reflected up here. All right. So this is how the plural, singular, plural, and dual is represented within the language. So here we have a root, sin, which means sibling. All right. If it's masculine and singular, it means brother. There's no special marking for the masculine singular. Therefore, sin as a root for sibling looks just like, was transliterated just like the root for brother. Sin, brother. If we want to say sister, we put the feminine T on the end and it'll be sinet, sister. This is how it looks, the feminine T. To say two brothers, we say sen we. We is the ending for dual, the masculine dual ending, we. How you recognize it in another word that you may be familiar with is the word tawi, two lands. A lot of people have heard that word, tawi. The word ta means land. Tawi, two lands. All right. Senwi, two brothers. To say two sisters, we say senetti or senti. The ty is denoting the dual, the two. And we have the raised bread loaf and we have the diagonal strokes representing the y, ty, senetti. Now, a word that you may be familiar with in that regard would be nebti, translated as the two ladies, which is Wajet and Nekibet, the two female deities of Upper and Lower Kemet. Nebti, the two ladies. This is no different. Senti, two sisters. Nebti, two ladies. Senti, two sisters. To say brothers, which is three or more, we say senu. See the quail chick, senu. Brothers. Now for sisters, three or more, we would say senut. Or some people will pronounce a vowel in between here and say senwet. In any case, the W comes before the T. The W here is represented by the quail chick. You have senwet or senut. Sisters. This is how the gender and number is reflected in the language. These are called declensional endings, where you can actually see the ending spelled out. These are the full spellings of these particular representations of gender and number. All right. Now, let's walk through. I'm going to walk you through a few resources on this particular grammatical feature in the language. So we're going to start here with James Allen, Middle Egyptian Grammar, page 38. And this is what he says. I have it highlighted here. All Egyptian nouns mark the plural by means of W. Masculine nouns add the W to the end of the noun. Feminine nouns add W before the feminine T. So according to James Allen, you add the W before the T ending, giving you WT. And he has examples here. Sister turns into sisters as senet turns into senwet, the W before the T. Hekat is hekawet, female rulers. Necheret, a goddess, is necherwet or necherut, W for the T, goddesses. Chafetet, a female enemy. Chafetwet, female enemies, plural. Chafat, female snake. Chafawet, plural, female snakes. All right. So according to James Allen, again, the W comes before the T for feminine plural. So that's James Allen. So let's check him off the list. Now, what he also explains, now that was page 38. This is page 39 from the same text, James Allen. What he also explains is when writing the plural, he has the same endings here, WT, WT, but he also explains that the plural determinatives actually replaces an older way of showing the plural, which was to write the determinative of the singular noun 3 times, and sometimes even the entire word itself 3 whole times. Okay, and he gives example. We have the word heka, and then we have 3 seated men as determinatives to show that the word is plural. So we have hekau, rulers. Senwet, sisters again. Necheru, gods or deities or divinities. And so he goes on to explain. He also goes on to explain that the 3 strokes is not always a sign of plurality. And he shows abstract nouns have the plural stroke, but they're not plural. They refer to them as false plurals. You see at the bottom of the page. This may be small for you to read it, but you can pause this and read the whole page here. All right. So let's read this part here. It says, on the one hand, it indicates that the preceding noun refers to more than one thing. On the other hand, it shows that the preceding noun has an ending W in the masculine or WT in the feminine. Okay, so again, both of these are from James Allen. Now, here's a summary from James Allen as well. Same book, just the next page. Here's a summary. We're going to skip down to feminine. He says feminine singular is the root plus a T. Gives examples. Feminine plural, he gives a root and WT. Gives examples. The dual, he gives the singular form plus the Y. In his transliteration system, he puts a J. The J and the Y in transliterations are interchangeable depending on which system that you adhere to. All right. Now, I want you to take a note of the order in which James Allen speaks of these, of the number. He speaks of singular first, and then plural, and then dual. Now, normally you would think that, okay, if singular is 1 and dual is 2, then why not mention dual after singular? Why not mention it singular, dual, then plural? Singular, dual, then plural. Why not discuss it in that order? I want you to take note because there is a reason for that. And you're going to find out that all the scholars, or most of the scholars who teach the language, who write grammars or describe the grammar, do the same thing as James Allen does. In this order, singular, and then they discuss the plurals, and then they discuss duals. Now, normally you may think that that's weird. There's a reason for that. Just keep that in mind. So now we're going to go to another scholar, another person. So here's Alan Gardner from his Middle Egyptian grammar book, page 58. And what does he say about gender and number? He says the same thing. He gives the feminine plural. See, he has singular. I want you to pay attention to this. Singular, then plural, then dual. Not singular, then dual, then plural. So I just want you to pay attention to the order in which these scholars are discussing these features. But nevertheless, in the plural feminine, he gives it as WT. All right. These are two separate scholars, both agreeing is WT. All right. That's that's Alan Gardner. Gardner goes on to say in the same book on page 59 and 60, I'm not going to read all of this. I just want to point out. Gardner also discusses the archaic way of denoting plurality, which is to write the determinatives double up or triple up, depending on dual or plural. Notice again, he has singular first, then plural, not dual. Singular, plural, then dual. All right. So he's basically explaining the same thing that James P. Allen explained. The endings here, where you can either write the word 3 times, all of itself, or you can have the strokes, etc., etc. Okay. Just showing you how these scholars are in agreement. On this side, on the right-hand side, he has a section on the omission of the plural and dual endings, how they're omitted. And he says, as seen in the last section, the plural and dual number of nouns were usually indicated by repetitions of signs or by use of special determinatives. All the more readily, therefore, could the actual phonetic terminations of W and WT, we, or TY, be omitted in the writing. Hence, we find Seru in place of the full spelling. So he's showing you the abbreviated spellings where the endings are omitted. The scribes had a habit of doing that. Okay. So you can read this, come back to this and read this. I'm not going to read the whole thing. Just pointing out key elements here where these scholars are in agreement. And we're going to discuss why in a second. That's Alan Gardner. Here's another scholar. So now we checked off James Allen. We checked off Sir Alan Gardner. Now we're moving on to James Hodge. James Hodge, in his Middle Egyptian grammar on page 28 and 29, he says the same thing. So I'm not going to read it. He says the exact same thing. He shows you the declension endings of gender and number. And so he has the plural for feminine, WT. Here he only has the T here because in his explanation, he informs everyone that the W in feminine nouns are almost always omitted. James Allen says the same thing. Gardner says the same thing. Okay? They're all in agreement. He talks about the repetition of the signs to denote plurality, etc., etc. All right? Same thing. James Hodge. So that's 3. Here's the 4th scholar. This is Antonio Lepriano from his work, Ancient Egyptian and a Linguistic Introduction, page 59. He also states that the feminine plural, here you can see it, WT. Move this here so you can see. WT. He says, and he gives an example. He has Hemet for woman versus Hemwet for women. Woman versus women. Or wife versus wives. All right. He gives several different examples. Renep wet for the plural of years, and renep for singular year. All right. And then he goes on and have reconstructions of hypothetical ways of pronouncing it in terms of the insertion of the vowels, etc. But this is from page 59 of his work. All right. So that's 4 scholars that are in agreement. Now, what happens is, if you were to stop here, what happens is there are people in the community that like to invoke the fallacy of race in terms of the truthfulness or the accuracy or the merits of a particular claim or argument. And that is a logical fallacy. So to cover those people that are like that, we're going to turn now to a couple of other scholars. Okay. These scholars are European scholars. Now we're going to turn to some African scholars. Oh, but before we do, we have one more. I forgot. We have E.A. Wallace Budge from his Grammar for Beginners, page 106. He has the same thing. So Budge is in agreement. So that's 5. It's 5 so far. James Allen, James Hodge, Gardner, Lepriano, and we have Budge. All right. Budge says that the feminine nouns in the plural end with UT. Now, it's a thing to note about Budge. Budge uses the U instead of a W. So the point is that if you were to change it to a W, it'll be WT. So he doesn't have here TU. He has UT. Hence WT. So Budge had his own transliteration style or system, and he used the U instead of the W. Okay, just for your knowledge. So he's in agreement. So how many is that? James P. Allen, James Hodge, Antonio Lepriano, Sir Alan Gardner, and we have Budge. Now we're going to turn to Ankh-Mi Ra. All right, those of you who know who Ankh-Mi Ra, he's an African scholar, African descent. From his text, Let the Ancestors Speak, page 77, he is also in full agreement. I drew the arrow here where he has the feminine plural ends in WT. Gives an example of the full spelling of the word sisters as Sinwet. The full spelling. All right. Ankh Ra. He goes on page 79, he goes on to elaborate. He says the plural. He says to construct the plural masculine noun in Medu Neter, the quail chick W is appended to the end of the word. He gives an example. Baku, for servants. He goes on to say the feminine plural is constructed by adding the T after the W, thereby rendering it WT. Gives an example. Bakwet, female servants. Full spelling. All right. So Ankh Ra is in agreement. All right. We're going to turn to another scholar of African descent. This is Dr. Raketi Amin. All right. Everybody should be familiar with Dr. Raketi Amin. She is the teacher of teachers. On page 7 or slide 7 from her beginner's introduction to the language, she also has the feminine plural WT. All right. Dr. Raketi Amin. Now we're going to turn to another scholar of African descent, except he's actually African. This is none other than Dr. Theophile Obenga. In his African Philosophy, page 27, he states the masculine plural was indicated by adding a W, by ending W, the feminine plural by the ending WT. Normally, a plural word was identified by 3 short lines added to the end of the word. For example, Necher or Necher meant God. Necheru or Necheru meant gods. And then he goes on. The point here is that Dr. Theophile Obenga, Dr. Raketi Amin, Ankh Ra, Sir Wallace Budge, Antonio Lepriano, James Hotch, Sir Alan Gardner, and James Allen all agree that the feminine plural ends with WT and not TW. So when I posted this here, where it says whenever you see the above word transliterated as Kim2, it's done in error. The above word is a feminine singular, so it's not even plural at all. But if it were a feminine plural, it would be transliterated as what? Kim wet, where the WT ending denotes feminine plural and not TW. Okay? So I have shown that all of these scholars are in agreement, regardless of their race, for those people who like to use that logical fallacy. All right. So now remember what I said. That let's go back here. Notice that Gardner discusses them in this order: singular, then plural, and then dual. Allen discussed the same way: singular, then plural, and then dual. So why is that? And how do we know that this is true or not in terms of the W coming before? Well, this is the answer. I also posted this on Facebook, but it may have gone over people's heads because this is the level of study that is outside the scope of a beginner's level class. All right. This is when you get more into the grammar, and specifically when you're studying morphological analyses and syntactic analysis. This is the only way that you can confirm or deny these different points that we're discussing. If you're not familiar with it and you don't know how to do it, or you're not familiar with the process or methods on how to do it, then you're not going to be able to follow along or make any claims for or against anything, which is what we see happening with the brother Netaneb, Dr. Clyde Winters, and others who are not familiar with the grammar. All right. So this is the reason why. Notice that this is the morphological order of inflectional morphemes for the feminine. But this is for both masculine and feminine. But we're paying attention to the feminine because this is the topic. We start off with the root. The first morpheme that reveals itself is the plural, whether it's plural or not. Then gender. and then dual. So between number, we have gender and number. Between the numbers, plural comes first. We have singular, the root, then plural, and then dual. So what this is saying, the minus PL means not plural. The plus PL is that it is plural. The minus F, it's not feminine, which is another way of saying it's masculine. And the plus F means that it is feminine. Minus F means that it's not feminine. Plus F, it is feminine. Minus DU is it's not dual. Plus DU, it is dual, etc. So here's how it pans out. So we had the root, sin. Remember, I said the root means sibling. Okay, so we have sin. So we take the root sin. Is it plural? No. Is it feminine? Yes, plus F. It's feminine. So not plural. Is it dual? No. So this means that it's a feminine singular. So sin, it's not plural. It is feminine, but it's not dual. Yields or renders us sinet, sister, singular, feminine, singular. Next one. The root sin, is it plural? No. Is it feminine? No. Is it dual? No. All three of these conditions yield a masculine singular, which is sin, brother. Next one. Sin, sibling. Is it plural? Yes. Is it feminine? Yes. Is it dual? No. Therefore, it yields or renders sinwet. The plural is the W, comes first. Then the feminine, gender, T. Plural first, then the gender. This is why we get sinwet. And it's not dual. Dual will come after. Notice, and I'm going to get to it. Let's skip to it. Let's go down to here. Sin, is it plural? No. Is it feminine? Yes. Is it dual? Yes. Therefore, the gender comes before the dual ending. So the T comes before the Y. All right. And so this has to be understood. And this is not understood by many people who may not be familiar with the grammar of the language and how this works out. So what I'm showing you here is how we are able to confirm and detect this on a morphological level and syntactically, as I showed earlier. All right. So this is the way that we can tell. So these scholars that I mentioned, the European scholars and the African American scholars or scholars of African descent, they're not just pulling things out of thin air and just making it up. Now, I want to make this clear. The brother Netaneb, in his discussion with the Saramotep, in his presentation, he went the extra mile to emphasize that Shekinah Diop is following a precise grammatical rule on the form, the feminine, and how adjectives, all adjectives can be nouns. So for his presentation, he emphasized over and over and over again, precise grammatical rule. Precise grammatical rule. All adjectives can be nouns. He even asked or challenged or charged Asar, why didn't he bring that up? In his presentation, he compared James P. Allen with that grammatical rule where all adjectives can be nouns side by side with Diop. Okay? But for some reason, when it comes to this feminine plural, all of a sudden, Diop, Obenga, Reketi Amen, Ankmi Ra, all of those people, they're not following precise grammatical rules. They're just following Europeans. The brother Netaneb is focusing on James P. Allen because he knows that if he focuses on Dr. Reketi Amen, Ankmi Ra, or Theophilo Obenga, that wouldn't be something popular. So he avoids saying that these people agree, that he disagrees with these people, but he'll emphasize his disagreement with James P. Allen. Yet, in his presentation, he used James P. Allen as a resource, as the precise grammatical feature, precise grammatical rule. All adjectives can be nouns. He cited James P. Allen for that. James P. Allen was his best friend during that lecture, but now James P. Allen is his enemy for this issue. All right. I just want to point that out. And I point that out because in science, we have what's called inconsistent logic in math and in science. And what the brother is displaying is inconsistent logic. And when people do that, this lets you know that the person is not researching for the sake of seeking accurate truth. They're researching to find anything to argue that agrees with their assumptions. And so they'll use anything at any given time, even if it contradicts something later. And this is what we're seeing. So I just want to point that out as a reminder of what not to do, of how not to research. All right. You don't want to have biases in your research. All right. So now let's go a little further. Let's talk about this reason for why the TW is being pushed as the feminine plural, as opposed to what all these other scholars are saying and what the morphology dictates. There are people out there, including Brother Netaneb, Dr. Clyde Winters, and some others that are pushing the TW. Now, what we have in the language is something called graphic transposition. And this is something that was brought up in the discussion about the feminine plural. That it's not really TW if you see it. That's an instance of graphic transposition. So what is graphic transposition? So here is a quote from Ankh-Mi Ra. Again, Ankh-Mi Ra, this is page 69. He says, as discussed previously, beauty was very important to the Africans, and they sometimes transposed symbols specifically for aesthetic reasons. Therefore, to create and maintain harmony and beauty, a tall sign may be placed in front of a bird when the proper reading calls for it to follow. For example, or that is, wajah. This first symbol is really the ja part of wajah, and the quail chick is really the W part of it. But notice that the ja comes first. This is to make it aesthetically pleasing, to make it look like an imaginary rectangle or square. So he says this, they usually do it this way instead of this way. Likewise with myrrh. Myrrh pyramid instead of this way, myrrh. He also goes on to say space conservation is another reason. Space conservation. That is, we have sabah, where you have the determinative that normally on the end is stuck in the middle. So we have this spelling instead of this spelling for star. A short or small symbol like the T is often placed before the bird when it should follow. Let me read that again. A short or small symbol like the raised bread loaf, the T, is often placed before the bird when it should follow. That is, like this instead of like this, WT. So when people like Netaneb or Dr. Clyde Winters or anyone else tries to argue that the feminine plural is a TW, and then that's their assumption, and then they go look for it, and they go and they see texts that have it spelled this way, they're automatically assuming that this is proof that the feminine plural should be TW. And so this is what I mean by research bias. That's very unscientific. When you research, you have to formulate a research question, and in that question is probably the most important part of the journey, because depending on how you shape your question will dictate the quality of your conclusion or your outcome. If you have bias in your question, your initial question, then in your search, in your look, in your discovery, you're going to also have those same biases. All right. So if you automatically think that it's supposed to be TW, and then you go out and look for it, then you're going to find something. But you're never going to know what that something is, because you're going to stop there and say, oh, see, there it is. You're not going to rule out chance. You're not going to rule out all the other possibilities of why that's there. And this is what people like Ned and Ned and Dr. Clyde Winters do on a regular basis. All right. And I'm saying that because a reminder for what not to do. See, we can always learn from other people's errors of what not to do. All right. And so Ankh-Mi Ra also explains graphic transposition the same way. And he gives another example with the vulture, which is G1 glyph. Here's an example of the T bread loaf in front of it for at, which is supposed to be after. Okay. So I just want everybody to understand this is Ankh-Mi Ra. All right. Another scholar who says the exact same thing. This is Sir Alan Gardner from his Middle Egyptian Grammar, page 51. And I'm doing this because of the people who always try to pull the social constructed race card that I use Ankh-Mi Ra and compare it to Alan Gardner. He also says the same thing, graphic transposition. Signs are sometimes transposed either in order to give a more pleasing appearance or for some less assignable reason. A small sign may be placed in front of the breast of a bird, even when the letter has to be read first. Thus, the T and the dub and the the bread loaf and the quail chick, according to the word in which it occurs, may be read either TW or WT. The bread loaf and the vulture glyph similarly, either ta or at. So how would you know? It goes again into what I called anaphora. You have to do a syntactic analysis of how the words are used within the context in which it is used. And this is why he says, according to the word in which it occurs. And then he goes on to say, thin vertical signs show a peculiar tendency to precede the bird, which they ought to properly follow. So you have given an example. Wedge, same thing. This spelled this way instead of with the quail chick first. Wajah, same thing that Ankh-Mi Ra had. Ankh-Mi Ra had the exact same example. Wajah instead of there. So we see the same example being used. Wajah in place of Wajah. This spelling as opposed to that spelling. Ahet, field. Same thing. The vulture is supposed to be first, as you see it spelled here. So it's supposed to be read or pronounced first, but you actually read it other than that. All right. So I just want everybody to understand that. All right. And like I said, anybody who's watching, if you have comments or questions, I am going to address them momentarily. There's one more thing I want to show you all, because one of the things that is being said as far as challenging this part of the grammar that I need to point out is that we have to remember that the Egyptian language was spoken way before it was actually written. Before the invention of the writing system, the language was already at play. The people didn't invent the writing system and then start to speak. They spoke first and then encoded their speech into signs and symbols that we call a writing system. I say that because we cannot allow the way that it was written to be the end all be all of how things should be grammatically. Remember, grammar is an issue of the language. Orthography is an issue of the writing system. Grammar, which is two things, morphology and syntax. Grammar is a language domain or phenomenon. It's the rules of a language. Orthography are the rules of a writing system. And so I'm going to repeat that. Grammar, which is morphology and syntax, are the rules and structure of a language. Orthography is the rules and structure of writing systems. You can't let the orthography dictate the grammar and say that's a end all be all situation. Whatever we see, that's how it is. You can't do that. How do we know that? I'm going to show you another example. Here is something called honorific transposition. What I discussed just now briefly was called graphic transposition. Here is honorific transposition, which means that full words, not just one glyph, being swapped. These are full words being moved out of place. All right. So on the left, we have an example of Ankh Mi Ra. And on the right, we have an example of it being explained by Alan Gardner. I show both of these, again, for the sake of those people who like to pull the social constructed race card. All right. Those people that do that are not scientists, because you don't attach a color or anything to a person's claim. You deal with a person's claim based on the merits of the claim, not on their skin color, their eye color, their hair color, what kind of cologne they wear, what kind of clothes they wear, what kind of car they drive. Those are silly things to focus on in terms of addressing the merits of someone's claim. So you always go for the merits of someone's claim. You don't personify the claim to the person. All right. We're dealing with claims and not people. I say that as a suggestion or as a pointer for those who are, trying to apply a little bit more better methods and rigor into their research. All right. If we didn't even have a picture of Alan Gardner ever or Ankh Mi Ra ever, we wouldn't even know anyway. So it will force us to deal with their claims and not who they are. All right. I just want to put that out there. Anyway, Ankh Mi Ra, transposition with honorific intent. This is honorific transposition. He says the names of netchers, kings, and words netcher or king are written before other words that are closely connected with one another. This is done in order to show honor to the netcher or king. So he gives an example. So we have Meri Amen. Notice in this example, Meri Amen, if you read it according to the glyphs, it will be Amen Meri. But nobody says that. Why? Because the phenomenon is called honorific transposition. The deity is placed in front of the other word out of honor. So if by using Netter Neb's logic that what you see dictates the grammar, then everybody should be saying Amen Meri. Amen Meri. And nobody does it. And I'm going to tell you another word that everybody will have to stop saying based on that logic. The word is Medu Netcher. When you see the phrase Medu Netcher written, Netcher is written first. Why aren't people saying Netcher Medu? Hey brother, can you read Netcher Medu? Can you speak Netcher Medu? Has Netcher Medu been deciphered? Nobody's saying that. There's a reason why nobody's saying that. Because the word Netcher comes first in writing, but grammatically it comes second. Again, grammar is an issue of language. Orthography is an issue of writing. Grammar trumps orthography. Always remember that. And the reason why is because the scribes' style and standards, they went for aesthetics. And so they transpose glyphs and they honor deities, moving the names of the deities in front. And if we allowed orthography to dictate grammar, we wouldn't be pronouncing any of these things the way we're pronouncing them. So let that be known. So here we have Mi Ra. Now, mind you, the venerated ancestor scholar Ankh Mi Ra is so named. Ankh Mi Ra. Life like Ra. That's what his name means. Live or life like Ra. Mi Ra. But when you see it written, it's Ra Mi. Why didn't Ankh Mi Ra have Ankh Ra Mi? Why isn't it Ankh Ra Mi? It's not Ankh Ra Mi. Why? Because he understood that it's honorific transposition. So the Ra comes first. The deity comes first. But it's Mi Ra, like Ra. We have Sa Nasut instead of Nasut Sa. And then here we have a few names. We have Ma'at Ka Ra. Ra is written first, but it's pronounced last. Ma'at Ka Ra. Ra is pushed all the way to the front. You see it here. If we were to say it the way we see it, it would be Ra Ma'at Ka. That makes no sense grammatically. That's how we know that honorific transposition is an actual phenomenon. All right. So the same thing, similar examples. We have Meri Amen. This is from Gardner now. Meri Amen. He speaks about that. Mira. He speaks about that. Seshnesu, which is royal scribe or scribe of the king. He speaks about that. Hem Netcher. Now this is an example of similar to what I said, Medu Netcher. This is how Medu Netcher would look, except it would be the med symbol here instead of the hem symbol. So Hem Netcher. Notice how Netcher is written first. Nobody says Netcher Hem. We say Hem Netcher for high priest. Okay? Or priest. Hem Netcher. All right, so remember that. So again, I'm showing this to show and demonstrate that grammar trumps orthography each and every time, not the other way around. So with that being said, what I'm going to do now, I'm going to walk you all through a thorough treatment on this subject. Okay, now and I'm doing this because the brother Netaneb, when he raises the question, he assumes based on his lack of knowledge, and this is why when the brother asks to debate me, I always tell the brother he's not my peer. He doesn't know enough about the grammar to debate me. He doesn't know enough about the language to debate me. All right, I've been dealing with the language for over a decade, been teaching it for over 7 years. I deal with the grammar and know the grammar inside and out, which means that I have read literature upon literature about the grammar from different scholars, different walks of life in multiple languages. Okay? Scholars that write in multiple languages. And so some of these questions that people are raising, these are not debated questions. Why? Because they've already been treated in full. And these people may not be aware of it, so they raise these questions. And so Brother Netaneb is one of such person who has not done the review. So he raised these questions, and I say this because in his recent question is that the reason why he questions the feminine plural is because in his effort to be different, in his effort to argue and fight whatever and anything, he feels, or justified, because he feels that for us to say that the feminine plural is terminated with a WT is that we're just following Europeans like robots. Okay, he's projecting his ignorance on the subject. All right, so let me show and demonstrate how and why we're not. So I'm going to show you an example of an exhaustive treatment where a person has surveyed text upon text to show graphic transposition. All right, this document here, it is written in 1902. This is how old it is. 1902, published in 1903. This is done by Pierre Lacou, a French scholar. And he wrote it. The title of the page is The Apparent Metathesis in Egyptian. That's what the French is. Now, this text is written in French. Okay. Now, years ago, when I first read this was like a long time ago. I had to translate this from French into English. So I took this and translated it. And so I'm going to just briefly show you my translation of the text. Okay. So again, Apparent Metathesis in Egyptian by Pierre Lacou. And I put translation from French and the glyphs by Wujawu Irimaat. All right. Now, I'm going to walk through this as time permits. I'm not going to read the whole thing, of course. This is 23 pages. He did 23 pages. Now, let me go back for a second. I need to stress something here. Okay, I want you all to understand something. If you all can see this on the screen, when Gardner speaks about graphic transposition, there's only one little small section. This is from page 51, a small little section. This is all he says about it in that section. You see how small it is? Just 2 little paragraphs, 3. Okay. Ankh Ra, small section. From page 69, small section. That's it. So it's no surprise that anyone who reads these materials here, they may feel a way and feel that, okay, well, this is an assumption. This is an assumption. You know, we're just being robots. We're just following along. Okay. But when you're a scientist and when you actually apply proper research and proper methodology and construct your research questions properly, you'll know that at the beginning of your journey, you have to do literature review. And so I'm going to switch back over. This particular text is 23 pages, not just a small section, but 23 full pages of an article within a journal. Okay, that's addressing the issue of graphic transposition. Now, I want to make a note that I'll show you I'll read through my version here, and then go back to his version, because in his version he has all of the glyphs that he's speaking about, whereas what I did, I translated the text and I didn't add all the glyphs in. Okay, so I'm going to go back to his version, but we're going to read and walk through it. But what I want to note here for now is the fact that what he refers to as metathesis, remember, this was written in 1902, published in 1903. We don't refer to it as metathesis. The reason why is because metathesis is a linguistic term for a phenomenon that deals with sound. Okay, when 2 sounds switch positions, that's called metathesis. Okay, that's in pronunciation. That's a sonic phenomenon. Okay, that deals with sound. When we say graphic transposition, we're talking about something written, characters or graphs that have moved, not sounds. So this is no longer called metathesis. And so what this author does is that he calls it apparent metathesis, not the sonic metathesis. So because that can be confusing, we no longer refer to it as metathesis at all. We refer to it as graphic transposition. Okay, so I want that to be clear. So whenever you see the author say metathesis, he's talking about graphic transposition, but he calls it apparent metathesis, what you see, not what you hear. Apparent, appear, the appearance of this swap. Okay. All right, so I'm going to walk through some of it. So I'm going to switch over so you can see the glyphs in his, but you have to listen carefully because I'm going to read and show. Now I'm not going to read the whole thing, but I'm going to walk through a few of the important highlights. All right. Okay, so he begins and he says, I'll read from here first, from mine. That way you can follow along and have a sense of being able to read through it. So he says, metathesis is very common in Egyptian at all times. Many good examples have been found, but the study of this phenomenon, which is rather complex in all languages only from the phonetic point of view, presents in Egypt a special difficulty which is due to the nature of the graphical system employed. It has long been found that scribes very easily change the natural order of signs in order to obtain a better grouping. So he gives an example. So we have Chafet spelled this way instead of this way. All right. We have Sa spelled this way instead of this way. And I hope you all can see that clear. The desire to place the letters in a more pleasant way is enough to completely distort the appearance of a group, its reading remaining identical. Notice what he says. He says, the desire to place letters in a more pleasant way is enough to completely distort the appearance of the group, that what you see. But its reading, what you pronounce and what you say out your mouth, is supposed to say the same. It said remains identical. Therefore, when we meet a word under a double spelling, in other words, when we see two different ways a word is spelled, we must necessarily ask ourselves if we are not in the presence of a purely graphic change before admitting that the displacement of the signs corresponds to a real metathesis. By real metathesis, he's talking about the sonic, a true change in the way that it's pronounced. He says this is the preliminary question. Now notice how he sets up his premise. And I'm going to repeat it. He says, when we meet a word under double spelling, which means that if you see a word that's spelled in two different ways, we must necessarily ask ourselves, are we in the presence of a purely graphic change, which is graphic transposition, or are we dealing with a true metathesis situation where the actual sounds are indeed different? That's what he's asking. So he goes on to say, I would like to examine today a whole series of metathesis which seem to me purely apparent, purely graphical, and without phonetic significance, which means that he's saying to him, this is his hypothesis now. He's saying that he's going to examine a whole series of them, and his assumption is that it's graphic and not sonic. It's purely graphic transposition. So then he goes further and starts to test and pull out examples and demonstrate. Now, mind you, I said this is 23 pages, and I'm not going to sit here and read all 23 pages, but I'm going to get to a point where my point is made and it hits home. All right. And by the way, if you all need this document, I can provide it for you. All right. I actually already posted this document on Facebook in our Facebook group, the Seshu Ma'ani Medu Necher. It's posted there. You can download it. All right. So then it goes on. He goes on to say, I recall how one can explain very naturally the feeling that guided the scribes. Any vertical or horizontal line formed a space clearly limited by two equidistant lines. To fill this space in a way that was not shocking, one must naturally seek to balance the voids as well as the full ones, blacks and whites, as exactly as possible. Blacks and whites, as he refers here, he's talking about white space. Okay, white space is blank space. Remember, the word blanca is the same as the word for white. All right, so white space is what he's talking about, blank. It was both saving space and avoiding holes in the whole line. It is necessary to forget here our modern graphic system. So he's saying we got to forget about how we write today. He said it's necessary. We got to forget that. Which is composed of 2 or 3 dozen letters, almost amorphous and of equal importance, roughly as external appearance. Hieroglyphic signs, on the other hand, constitute a set of forms extremely different from each other and at the same time very fixed, since they are the representations of certain objects. Remember, in English, all of the lowercase letters pretty much fit in the same block, same thing. But in Sesh Medu Necher, we have images of all kinds of different things. Some tall, some short, some wide, some small, etc. That's what he's saying. The general outline of the hieroglyph alone determined the space reserved for it in the line, and practically 4 types of signs reduced to fixed dimensions were obtained. And so here we have the examples. Number 1, large square signs occupying the whole height of the line or all its width according to whether it was horizontal or vertical. So he gives example, the birds, the vulture, the quail chick, the owl, the floor plan. So in a column, we have the bird being by itself. In a row, the bird will be by itself. 2, vertical signs occupying the whole height in a horizontal line, but only half the width in a vertical line. So these are tall signs. So we have the reed leaf, the foot, the twisted flax, and the folded cloth. And therefore we have in a horizontal row, it would be this way. It reaches the top. But in a vertical column, we have enough room to write 2 of them side by side. So that's what he's explaining. 3, horizontal signs occupying the whole width in a vertical line, but only half the height in a horizontal line. So here are the short and narrow. I'm sorry, the wide but narrow, the short and wide. So we have the arm, the viper, water ripple, mouth, the belly, teat, the door bolt, pool, cup and handle, etc., etc. And so it's written in a column form where it expands the whole width, but in a row, it's not tall enough so you can write 2 of them. So there's enough room to write 2 glyphs on top of each other. The tall glyphs, you can't write 2 on top of each other, but you can write 2 beside each other if it's in a column. This is what he's explaining. Now, mind you, this was written in 1902. Modern scholars in their grammars, they say the same thing, but they summarize this. They don't show all of this. And I'm making that a point. Number 4, small square signs occupy roughly a space equal to a quarter of the large square signs. By large square, he's talking about the quadrants. These imaginary squares or rectangles that the scribes drew and outlined when they carved. Okay, so these smaller glyphs only represent 1/4. That means you could fit 4 of these in one area, whether it's a row or a column, because they only represent 25% or 1/4 of the space. Okay, remember that. The same division applies equally to all the syllabic signs of the hieroglyphic system. These relative proportions given to the signs made it easy to obtain what has been called the middle finger of the group, a well-known fact which struck early in Egyptian studies. But once this progress has been realized, it often happens that this or that root is represented by signs which, placed one after the other in their natural order, give an unpleasant whole, or leave some blanks in between them and do not form a square group. Remember, as Uncle Miraj said, beauty was everything to Africans. And for aesthetic purposes, they couldn't have holes and blank spots. So he's saying that words written in their natural order, because of the various different shapes of these glyphs, they may have an unpleasant look about them. Okay? So to avoid this inconvenience, we use various movements of signs that we will examine. So here's the first group that he examines. Now, mind you, again, I'm not going to read this whole document. It's 23 pages. I suggest you download it yourself. I provided it in our group. Examination number 1. The small signs placed after a bird in a vertical line as well as in a horizontal line leave an unpleasant white space, especially when they themselves are followed by another vertical sign or square sign, with which they cannot form a group. So it gives an example. So you have the reed, 2 vulture glyphs, bread loaf, and the scepter. Or the bread loaf leaves beside him a considerable white space. So, matter of fact, let me go over to his document. So I'm going to switch over so you all can see it clearer, the glyphs clearer, and that so you'll listen to me as I'm reading through it, but you'll be able to see it clearer with the glyphs. All right. So this is where we are. So I know you can see my cursor. So he's saying, for example, par example. Now, I can't pronounce French, but I'm familiar with French words and doing this for a while. So, for example, he says, in this particular row, we have the reed leaf, vulture, vulture, raised bread loaf, and a scepter. Okay? Then he says, or in this situation here, which is a column, now we have the bread loaf leaves a considerable white space. So he says, on the other hand, there's an empty space between the head and the legs of almost all the birds. So if you notice, when you look at all the bird glyphs, under the belly there's always blank space, or next to the head behind them there's blank space, and the scribes didn't like that. Okay, so the little sign that follows a bird is precisely lodged there, and so it is placed before it. Okay, so this explains the following spellings, most of which have been known since a long time. Okay, so here are examples. So we have the diagonal strokes before the bird, which is really, this should be spelled this way. The diagonal strokes coming after the bird. This is a quail chick, by the way. Now, this is for the ending in duels. So it says in the ending of duels, there's duels. So we have the diagonal strokes before the bird, which is graphic transposition, for what it should be as far as how you pronounce it will be we. Remember I said ta we, sin we, two brothers, ta we, two lands. Okay. Likewise, we have the bread loaf before the quail chick for the proper spelling of the quail chick, then the bread loaf. Because see, here it forms a better looking square. Here it leaves a lot of blank space here, and the scribes did not like that. And this is for the termination in the plurals of feminine plurals. See termination? This is for the ending in feminine plurals. So he's showing you here that this is graphic transposition, TW. This is what's confusing people like Netta Neb and Dr. Clyde Winters and everybody else who's confused by this. All right. So it says the form here with the T in front of the quail chick is so frequent in the text and had become so habitual to the scribes that one hesitated for a long time on the true reading of the feminine plural. So this confused people because this is so common. Both are so common, like both of these switching back and forth. It was so common that it hesitated people to understand the true reading of the feminine. Like, whoa, what's going on? Hence, this is why people are confused today. Why? Because they're not familiar with this study here. And he's not the only one. I'm only showing one. But there's more. All right. For time's sake, I'm only going through this one. But this has been treated in full. It's not a debate. It's not a question anymore. The data is there. And so this entire 23 pages shows the data. So get it and you'll be able to see. So here's some more examples. So we have the bread loaf before the vulture. This particular vulture. Okay. And mind you, he gives all of the citations. So this is from the text, the Mir 84. Spell 84. These are from pyramid text, by the way. 84, 128, and throughout, et pasim, throughout, is for this. So in here it's spelled this way, but over here in 126 it's spelled this way. Okay. Another one we have in the word nisud biti. This is the beat. We had the T in front of the B, and sometimes we had a T behind it. Okay, another example. We have this one where the tethering rope, raised bread loaf, quail chick, which is really this way. Tethering rope, quail chick, then the bread loaf. Okay, so he gives examples. So we have this text in spell 43, 70, 80, so on and so forth. But over here in Pepe II in 123 and throughout, it's spelled this way. So again, I'm not going to read this whole thing, but I want to show you where this person, this scholar here, back in the early 1900s, he already did a survey of the text showing the graphic transposition of how the scribes moved the glyphs, and instances where they were spelled correctly or spelled out the way that they should be, to show and demonstrate and prove graphic transposition actually taking place. Again, this is what? This is all orthography. This is orthographic rules and phenomenon that never trumps the grammatical rules that I showed earlier, where you have the root, then the plural, then the gender, then the dual. Always remember that. Let that be known. So here's some more examples here where we have a T in front of the vulture, but over here the T is behind the vulture. This is from text 660. This is from 671 in Pepe. Okay. Pepe II, 841, we have it spelled this way with the 2 bread loaves in front. Here we have the 2 bread loaves behind. Now, mind you, what's good about this is because this is how you do research. This person is not dealing with just the feminine plurals. He's dealing with birds, period. So he's showing the vulture, this vulture. He's showing the other vulture. He's showing the bee. He's showing how and the nature of the orthography works, how the writing system actually works. The nature of this small sign next to a bird. And graphic transposition, by the way, is heavily done with the birds. The birds seem to pose the most problems for the scribes. Remember that. It's the birds. The birds. Blame it on the birds. So here's another example of this particular word here from Lepsius, citations here. All this stuff is cited. And this is how you would normally spell it, which is oped, which is for duck, the word for duck. But if you look at it here, it looks like it's spelling pod. But it's properly pronounced oped. The vulture comes first. All right. So let me skip down. So I just want you all to see that this is very thoroughly cited, and examples upon examples upon examples are given. All right, so I'm going to skip on down. These are all examples, right? Comparing texts from the same pyramid text, from different pyramid text, the whole thing. All right, here's another one. Another example there. All right, so just to skip forward. Now, mind you, see, he's showing the vulture here and another small sign. It's not always just a bread loaf. The point here, and it shows it here, if you can see my cursor here. The point here is, as he outlined before, and this is what we teach today. This is what I teach my students. That's what we teach in beginners and grammar. But on the beginners level, you're taught that all of the glyphs can fit into 4 categories according to their shape. You have tall, narrow signs. You have short, wide signs, and then you have small signs. Okay? The small signs take up 1/4 of the space. And so it doesn't matter if it's a bread loaf or a hill, which is what this is. And so he's showing that a bird and a small sign combination, you're going to see graphic transposition. So in this instance, in this source, we have it spelled this way, but over here in this particular source, we have it spelled with the hill behind the bird. Okay, and this means a usual form, habitual form. The usual form is this way. Okay, and so what he says here is that in a general way, all the small square signs can be placed before the bird that precedes them. In the example cited above, the process is perfectly clear. So he shows all these examples, and he says that these are clear. All right. Notice how the bread loaf is behind the bird here, but the hill is in front. And here is the habitual or the usual form is this way. Both of those small signs are behind the bird. Okay. So it's not just about feminine plural. And so he goes on and on. He shows all these examples. But what I want to do is I'm going to skip on down to where he specifically treats and speaks about the quail chick again. So he shows the quail chick here again. And he shows not only with the bread loaf is this T graphically transposed, the bread loaf graphically transposed, but he also shows these other signs. Okay. So I want everybody to understand. And so if we were to go here, now, mind you, I'm skipping around. I'm skipping out because I don't want to read this whole document on the air for time's sake. But again, download the document. The document is in French. If you know somebody to speak French, ask them to, help you out. I have translated it, and you can contact me for my translation. But my translation doesn't have all the glyphs in it. I translated the actual text portion because, the glyphs are there, and you could just hold them side by side. All right. So what he's saying here is that he's giving a hypothetical possibilities here. Okay. He says, therefore, it's two hypotheses. Number one is a question of real phonetic metathesis. This is true metathesis. This is what real metathesis is. This is what the word metathesis means. Okay. Then two, are we dealing with graphic transposition? So he re-asked the question after showing all these examples, and he shows these examples here. Now, mind you, it is not just about the quail chick. He shows the examples with the owl. He shows examples with the two different vultures and the quail chick. Okay, as a researcher should, who's asking these questions. Okay, so he re-asked the hypothesis, and then he goes forward and shows more examples and comparisons. So he shows the tall signs. So he goes through the tall signs, not just the small signs that we were looking at before. The tall signs, the ja. This is weja again, where the ja symbol is under the beak of the bird. See it under the beak? Another one here. And here he says, Maspero, which is another scholar, Maspero has already remarked that, and he quotes him, he says, at least in the text drawn in columns, any sign placed lower than the head of the bird, which accompanies the sign, is to be considered behind it. So he gives an example right here. This duck and the foot, this sign is under the beak, it is supposed to be read as if it's behind it. So you would pronounce this as SIB, SB, and not BS. Right here. So SIB instead of, and not BIS. It's SIB instead of BIS. Likewise, we have the word webin. We don't pronounce this buin or buin. We pronounce this webin, which means to shine. Webin, to shine. Okay? Or to rise. So these are examples. And so he's saying here the same thing. The T in front of here, under the beak, it should be written after, read after, as if it's after it. After it. So what does all this mean? It means that the feminine plural, as terminating in WT, is morphologically sound. That's how the grammar is, based on the morphological behavior of gender and number. Now, how it's represented in the writing system, we're witnessing graphic transposition for the sake of aesthetic reasons. And we can see patterns here. All right. So he goes on and on and on and on and on. All right. So here's an example. In this page, he does a full treatment with the owl. He shows how these glyphs are in front and behind the owl, in front of the owl, behind the owl. And he shows back and forth graphic transposition taking place with the owl. Remember what I said earlier. Blame it on the birds. The birds was the most problematic in terms of aesthetics for the scribes. This is why graphic transposition is frequent, most frequent when it comes to the birds. All right. So he goes through a whole comparison with the owls. Okay. And so he shows this word. He shows examples after examples. And like I said, I'm not going to read them all. Okay. So he goes through all of the owls. He goes through owls and compare. Then he gets to number 2, the quail chick. Okay. This is the one that concerns us with the feminine plural. But mind you, this is a phenomenon with all the birds. Okay. So he shows this. He shows this with the quail chick. And even here he says already seen above. So he already gave a whole bunch of examples. So he's just repeating some with some different signs, not even the bread loaf anymore. So he's showing even this particular setup. This is supposed to be wajah. Like when people say unk uja, this is supposed to be uja right here. But the ja comes first. Why? Because the tall signs, because they're short and narrow, they come before the birds and not after, which makes it look ugly to the scribes. Okay. So he gives all the references you can look up inside the what spell, what pyramid text, and so on and so forth. Okay. So he gives this example as opposed to this one, and so on. So he does the whole thing with the quail chick. Even down here, he gives more examples of this sign combination, of how they're switched around. Okay. Same thing here. All right. So all these examples, like I said, I'm not reading it. I'm just want to show you. Then he goes and he does with this particular glyph and the birds, which is the reed leaf. He compares the reed leaf and how it's positioned around birds. So he shows the word here, which is we, which is a pronominal, which is the dependent pronoun we for me. And he shows how sometimes you'll find it this way. And people confuse it with the word you or oo and think it's starting a new sentence. And so he explains all of that here. Okay. And shows where it's found in different ways. Okay. He keeps on going. So like I said, I'm not going to read this whole thing, but I'm going to fast forward. I'm going to scroll all the way down. And mind you, I just want you to see how thorough this is. This is 23 pages. And he goes through the quail chick and the reed leaf. He shows the vulture and the reed leaf inside of columns. Then he goes with the foot. He shows examples with the foot and the duck, the foot and the quail chick, the foot and the vulture. Everything. Shows another example here. On and on and on and on and on and on. All right. The twisted flax with the vulture, twisted flax with the quail chick. On and on. Twisted flax with the owl. On and on and on and on. Then he goes through with the folded cloth with the owl, folded cloth with the vulture and the owl, and so on. Okay. Just want you all to see how thorough this work is. Okay, it goes on and on and on and on and on. I can keep on going, but let me fast forward all the way down to his conclusion. I'm gonna go all the way down to his conclusion. Now, mind you, see how fast I'm scrolling. He goes after glyph after glyph after glyph, combination after combination after combination. Okay. So if you want the resource to look up, it is well cited. It has all of the primary references that you can look up and everything. There's no need to talk about 5 or 3 or 10 examples. This book is loaded with many upon many examples. Okay. So here's his conclusion. Okay. Here at the bottom. All right. So I'm just going to read his conclusion. Again, like I said, you all can download it. If you read French, that's beautiful. Just read it. Get it. But he says, I summarize these observations, which led me to too many digressions, meaning that his research question led him to discuss some things that even veered off of the subject. He says, we observed 4 principles of calligraphic grouping that give rise to apparent metathesis. Remember what I said, apparent metathesis, according to him, is what we call graphic transposition. True metathesis is sound. Apparent metathesis is graphic. So we don't refer to that way anymore. we refer to as graphic transposition. So that's what he means. He says, we observe four principles of calligraphic grouping that give rise to graphic transposition. Or he says apparent metathesis. Metathesis apparentis. Number one, he says, number one, all the small square signs can be placed under the bird which precedes them. And then he gives an example. Wet can be as two. Graphic transposition. You wouldn't pronounce it this way. You still pronounce it wet. Number two, any thin vertical alphabetic or syllabic, which means when he's by syllabic, he's talking about whether they're biliteral or triliteral. So whether it's monoliteral, biliteral, or triliteral, he says any thin one of those may be placed before the bird which precedes it. And then he gives the example. So we have the owl coming first. Sometimes it's before the owl. The quail chick coming first. Sometimes it's before the quail chick. Okay. Mind you, this is his summary. Number three, any horizontal sign between two vertical signs can be placed below. And he gives the example here. So we have the horizontal signs that's placed in between two tall signs can be placed below. And that's how you see it. So this will be sa, but if you look at it this way, you would tend to want to pronounce it as saha, saha instead of sa, S-A-H. Over here, people would tend to say S-H-A. Okay, that would be incorrect. Fourth, he says the last two processes, may be employed in the same word. So he said that he's saying that this same word here, we have wa, and here we will have hawa. If you were to read this incorrectly, it'd be hawa, but it's correctly wa. Okay. And then he goes on and summarizes and says, there are still other similar combinations which I postponed. That he's saying that I could have went on and on and on, but he stops. He said there are still other combinations which I postpone. The extension of these calligraphic orthographies. See orthography again right here. See this word orthographies. I don't know how you pronounce it in French, but it's the word for orthography. The extension of these orthographies and their role in Egyptian have, I believe, been much greater, at least in the old times, ancient old times, than has hitherto been believed. So he's saying that a lot of this stuff, this transposition and stuff like that, took place in the old writing. Okay. He goes on to say that these remarks are important for the history of the Egyptian graphic system. The development of the Egyptian graphic system. They are essential to be aware of the most formally of a large number of roots and to usefully address the study of metathesis of consonants. All right. So and that's his conclusion. And I'll conclude with that. All right. Like I said, as you can see, I skipped over a tremendous amount of material. All right. And I show this because this is something that should be part of anybody's research if you're going to address this question. And this is only one. And mind you, see, I'm still scrolling and scrolling and scrolling. This is the beginning. This should be part of anyone's research. Now, mind you, this is only one particular person. Only one person. There are many others. All right. And I'll just name the others. Faulkner, the one who wrote the famous dictionary. Okay. Faulkner's dictionary. Raymond Faulkner. Raymond Faulkner, 1929, did a treatment on graphic transposition. Okay. You can seek out his work. It's in 1929. Faulkner did a treatment on it. Also, you can find Kurt Seth. Matter of fact, let me show you that one. I'll try to be as quick as possible. So here is Kurt Seth. This is from his work called Verben. Mind you, he wrote in German. So Verben, Volume 1, Section 297. And so this is not nearly extensive as the one I just went over. But here is a summary of what he shows in terms of graphic transposition. So it's handwritten, and it's written in German. So if you don't understand German, and also you have to understand his handwriting, then you're going to be a bit lost. All right. But regardless, you can see the citations. So you can use this and see the citations and look them up. OK, feminine name. You can see all of its examples here. OK, this is another tool to use in literature review. Now, mind you, you're supposed to do this literature review before you even start to iron out your own hypothesis and try to challenge people and make YouTube videos and Facebook live videos and start to challenge people and say that you're after certain scholars. Like, this is the kind of stuff that makes us look bad when you prematurely do these kinds of things. Okay. And so again, I'll just conclude there with this subject. And so what I want to do is summarize that the feminine plural, just to be very, very clear, the feminine plural always terminates grammatically with a W and a T. Orthographically, you have instances of graphic transposition. Graphic transpositions do not dictate what is in the grammar. I gave the example, tons of examples that I just gave you, but I also gave you the example of honorific transposition, that if what you see dictates the grammar, then none of us will be saying Medu Necher. None of us will be saying Mi Ra. None of us will be saying Tudunk Amen. We would be saying Amen Tudunk. There's a whole host of words that we would not be pronouncing the way that we pronounce or say the way we say. And grammatically, they would make no sense at all. So remember that grammar trumps orthography. Grammar trumps orthography. Why? Because in the orthographic system, the scribes had discretion. They had a little leeway for aesthetic reasons to move the glyphs around a little bit. And what set of glyphs gave them the most problem? The birds. Blame it on the birds. Remember that. Blame it on the birds. Okay? So, again, I'll just conclude there. But now, I do want to say something about this kinds of things here. Is that during the discussion on the meaning of Kemet, like I said, that was dead before it started. Toponyms never refer to people. They never refer to people or describe people. So there was never ever a question. Okay? Never a question. Don't fall for the banana in the tailpipe. You're being distracted. Anybody that brings up Kemet means black people, they have lost their mind, because they should know that toponyms never refer to people. They refer to places. That's why they call place names. Okay? That's number one. Number two, don't appeal to authority. Just because somebody says something doesn't make it true. Always judge a person's claim on the merit of the claim, regardless of who they are, what they look like. They could be red, pink, yellow, brown, purple, or gold. Does not matter. Address the claim on the merits of the claim, on the logic and the premise of the claim itself. Don't fall for the banana in the tailpipe and allow somebody to play on your emotional connection to anybody. Number three, we all can make mistakes. You can be the expert of experts and still make a mistake. No one is exempt from making mistakes, especially when, as time goes on, new data, new inventions of machinery that allows us to probe deeper, to expand our human senses even more, that we can detect and see and measure more and more and more things in our universe and around us, that we're going to have more data to work with. Science is self-correcting. Science cares nothing about how you feel. Doesn't care if you woke up on the wrong side of the bed. Doesn't care if you're hungry. Doesn't care if you just got a divorce, broke up from your husband, whatever the case is. Science doesn't care about that. None. It's cold and rigid and hard. Always remember that. All right. And then another thing is that going into 2019, we have to really stop being enablers. We have to truly stop being enablers. For example, on this question of Kemet, I don't call that a debate. It wasn't a debate. You know, I've been involved with real debates in school, out of school, on a formal level, and that's not a debate. That's not even peer review. You don't peer review videos. You peer review articles. You peer review papers, and then the review, whoever's gonna review it will write up the review. You don't have anonymous judges or anonymous whoever to judge something, especially if you're in contact with your friend, just to pat you on the back. So that event, if I were to judge what Netaneb did and what Asar did, at the end of the day, all Netaneb did was to show the public that after 2 years of learning, he can finally identify some cognates. That's it. On the other hand, Asar, what he did was he showed people how, he actually taught people how to actually do comparative linguistics. It may have gone over people's head initially because he introduced the process by way of computational linguistics, things that we use in proposition logic and computer programming, which are very, very, very rigid and rigorous. Because remember, computers are dumb. They only do what you tell them to do. So every single thing you feed a computer has to be on point. And so that's the kind of rigor that has to be applied to this type of work, preferably. And so Asar introduced computational linguistics with the formulas and so on, and that may have went over people's heads. So he went over that again today in a more slowed down fashion. So I recommend that you watch the video that he did today. All right. But by enablers, I'm talking about we have people that are enabling the bad behavior, bad character, by not speaking up about it, and the sloppiness of research. And so we have people going around thinking they did something that they really didn't do. So much so they have a battery in their back to want to try to step up and challenge and debate any and everybody. The brother Netaneb challenged me to a debate. I told him that I only debate my equals. All others I teach. The brother doesn't know enough grammar to debate me. This is everything I said to him. He's not knocking on Dr. Raketi Amin's Facebook page, begging her for a debate. So this is what I call this adversarial, challengey way of learning. And there's certain people that are like that, and I understand it. But the brother like Netaneb or anybody like him, they would be better off if they chill out and calm down. They could learn more and they could do it at a faster pace, because we are trying to help everybody. We don't want to sit there and fight and battle and go back and forth and do that kind of stuff. We have resources to share. The brother Asar Motep been addressing the question about Kemet for 20 years. I've been dealing with the language on a teacher's capacity for going on 8 years now. I say more 7+, but it's going on 8 years now as a teacher, not just a student. I'm talking about a teacher. I've been teaching it. Okay, so you would think somebody in their right mind that if somebody's been doing something for 20 years and somebody's been teaching for over 7 years, that you would use those people as resources and not your enemies. So this conscious community has it twisted. We have to clean it up. So in 2019, you expect me, at least from my point, is that it's not going to be tolerated at all. All right. So 2019 is coming early right now, in terms of all these erroneous claims that's being made, battery packs being put in people's backs and stuff like that, where you have scholars who are scared to debate Asar in public, but they'll use other people, amateurs, to debate, and then behind the scenes say they want to debate just to give them justification that they went against the brother Asar. That's what's really going on. All right, I'm calling it like I see it. Period. All right. So we have to stop that. All these elders out here that are enablers, stop that. I wouldn't want anybody to do that for me, and I don't do that to other people. All right. So lastly, I'm saying learn the language. The only way you can even claim that you even know the language, a language, is if you know its grammar. The grammar represents the structure and the rules for how the language works. If you don't know the structure and rules of something, then you don't know that something. You can't play basketball until you know the rules of basketball. You can't kick the basketball around because that's not a rule of basketball. That's soccer. You can't play soccer and call it basketball and think you're going to win basketball. You can't call a house a car and go in the house and drive to the store. So we have to be precise and better at what we're saying and what we're doing. Call it what it is. All right. So with that, that just concludes what I'm saying about the feminine plural and the graphic transposition. Like I said, this has been pretty long, but I didn't want. I could have gone a lot longer, but I'm going to address some of the comments in the comments if anybody's is commenting. So if you had a comment or question, if you asked it earlier or you made a comment earlier and I didn't see it, just repost it now because that'll prevent me from having to scroll all the way up and read through the conversations that everyone's having with each other. All right. So for the sake of time, if you had a question about anything, you can type that now. And while I'm waiting for the comments, let me point out something else. This is what we call inconsistent logic and being hypocritical. Okay. Diop is our modern day, pretty much our modern day Imhotep, genius of geniuses. Okay. We probably wouldn't be doing anything that we're doing now. I can speak for myself, and I'm sure a lot of others will agree with me. I probably wouldn't be doing what I'm doing had it not been for Diop and what Diop has done. So we're indebted to Diop's work. I've never met Diop, unfortunately, or any of that stuff. His work has motivated me to do what I'm doing. So I owe and I'm indebted to Diop, his work. Even still, Diop is not exempt from being wrong. And so Diop himself tells us not to believe him. In fact, he says it bothers him. I wish I had that quote handy that I could show it really quick. And I don't have it handy to read because I like to show what I'm reading. But Diop himself says that it bothers him that people just believe him and that people should check behind him. Okay. In fact, here it is here. Quote, this is Diop. He said, I would like to see above all a greater number of researchers, Afro-Americans, young Americans, even whites. Why not? Because it's the young who are the least prejudiced. As a consequence, they are the most capable of making triumph ideas which frighten the older generation. Also, I think that it would be necessary to put together a polyvalent scientific teams capable of doing in-depth studies for sure. And that's what's important. It bothers me when someone takes me on my word without developing a means of verifying what I say. We must form a scientific spirit capable of seeing even the weaknesses of our own proofs. of seeing the unfinished side of our work and of committing ourselves to completing it. You understand? And then he goes on. The point here is that Diop himself, as great and as genius as he is, he also realized his own shortcomings and doesn't want us to fall for the banana in the tailpipe. And so this is what we're doing. We're actually doing what Diop says. We're not personifying Diop into and personality worship to where we cannot, if we find mistakes, then, we have to keep our mouths shut. And I say this because there's people in the conscious community that are bothered by the fact that we can actually advance Diop's work. And I word it that way, advance his work, because when you advance somebody's work in science, you understand that correction is an advancement. In science, when you correct something, it's an advancement. It's not looked at as, you putting me down or you're belittling somebody. No, not at all. Scientists know that. Real scientists know that. And they look forward to it. And this is what Diop is saying. He looks forward to it. He said, it bothers me when somebody takes me up for my word. Okay, but let me check out the comments here. So I am trying to see if any comments, and I don't see any questions. Okay, question. Second Ra, when were you first introduced to Diop's work? I was introduced to Diop's work in the 90s. But as you should know that, there's a time and season for everything. Sometimes when you're first introduced to something, it doesn't stick. You may not pay attention to it. It may not be a priority in your life. It may not be a focus in your life or anything like that. You may be introduced to something and, read something. But if it's not part of something that you are focused on, it may not be in the forefront. And then it becomes out of sight, out of mind. So this is what happened with me in terms of Sheikh Anta Diop's work. I was introduced to his work because you asked me when. This was early. This is in the 90s. But as far as it sticking, and stuff like that, that's a different story. That came a little later. All right. In terms of the UNESCO conference and the fight for Egypt and all this fight for blackness and all that kind of stuff, we had these kind of discussions a long time ago. All right. Yeah, I don't see any really questions. Okay, it says second Ra, Netanyahu just wants to be recognized for something and yet can't get beyond the mental wall of holding him back. He thinks running to someone and sees him credible, giving him a nod means he made it. Okay, see, well, that's your assessment. And see, a lot of people, see, and the thing about Netanyahu, see, I know Netanyahu from online. I've never met the brother in person. Make that clear. We've never met in person. Only thing I know about him is from online, from years ago, before he was even using the screen name Netanyahu, even before I even used the name Wujao, before my screen name was Wujao. All right. He used to defend the Nuwabian doctrine and stuff. And so I debated him on stuff like that. And it was just, couldn't go anywhere with that. So there's a history. There's a history between him and Asar, a history between him and me and myself and other people. So this is not something new. And so, I don't see any too much change in the attitude that the brother has towards learning and then working with people. And some people like that. So I'm not saying that to even say that that's wrong or a put down. There's just certain people that are a certain way. But we just can't see. My point is that we can't pretend that it's other than what it is. Okay, I don't believe in elephants in rooms. I'm trying to see if there's any questions. So I'm scrolling up a little bit and see if I see any questions. And mainly I see son at Emiket. Let's see. Any questions? No questions. No questions. No questions so far. Dr. Amos Wilson, this is from Vyasa. Dr. Amos Wilson says, seek all information regardless of race, and by coming with an African mind with even your questions, you will still be fine. Forgive the paraphrase. Try to make this fit. Right. That's it. I mean, really, listen, a true scientist doesn't care about that. You only deal with the merit of somebody's argument, the premise upon which it is built, and the logic flow from it. That's all you worry about. You don't care if their sexual orientation, their race. Because if you focus on the merit of their argument, the premise of their argument, and the logical flow from that argument and how they reach their conclusion, whatever biases and stuff that they had that you don't worry about will come out in the wash. It will come out. It will reveal itself because you'll find errors in the work. And then you'll be able to connect the dots that, okay, well, you made an error because you're prejudiced, because you're this, because you're that. You don't assume that because see, this is what happens. If we are to assume that Europeans got it wrong or they lie and stuff, what we're also saying is that black people or Africans or people of African descent can't lie and always get it right. And when you do that, you open yourself up to be even more vulnerable, because what happens is when people are different from you, you pay attention to that. But when people are like you, you put your guards down. And those are the people that can get the closest to you and can do the most damage because you're not guarded against that. So we have a lot of people in brown skin that are miseducating and misdirecting people that go unnoticed. Why? Because they get a pass because they're black. They're of African descent. So don't fall for that romanticism and all that other kind of stuff. Just deal with it scientifically. It doesn't matter. Wrong is wrong and right is right. Doesn't matter. People who focus on that are very immature in their methodology. Very immature. And then you have people that are using African descent scholars as prophets to promote a new religion. And the new religion is this idea that we have to stay stuck and stagnant upon things that have been said in the 1970s, 1980s, the 90s, the early 2000s, when science is always moving forward, always moving forward. We give the utmost respect to all these scholars, because when you're a real scientist, when you have the scientific spirit, as Diop says here, he says we must form a scientific spirit. When you actually have that scientific spirit that he's speaking about, you know how to proceed forward. You know to address people, not the person. You don't personify claims to a person. The person is just a vehicle for the argument. You argue against the argument, not the person. So you respect the person, but you address the argument. That way you don't have to worry about things getting personal and all that kind of stuff. You don't have to worry about the person, what the person does. The argument. That's how it works. So I'm scrolling. I don't see too many. Let me scroll back down. Okay, let's see. Second round. Okay, I already read that. So I guess there's not too many questions. I'm at the bottom. So yeah, I'm not, like I said, I'm not going to hold this up. Listen, if I missed anybody's questions or anything of that nature, join our Facebook group. All right, join our Facebook group, Seshu Maani Medu Nature. As a matter of fact, let me go ahead and show the Facebook group. And before I do that, let me share what Asara Motep posted 2 hours ago. All All right. And this is interesting because people are crying that we're saying that Shekender Diop was wrong on his opinion and assumption that the word Kemet means black people. And so people saying, how dare Asar or how dare whoever challenge Diop and so on and so forth. Well, Asar did a post that I'm sharing right now where Diop's student, protege, apprentice, and colleague, Dr. Theophilo Benga, also challenged and disagreed with Diop. So if it was all about just agreeing just for the sake of Diop being Diop, then Theophilo Benga wouldn't have done it. And you all can go to Asar's page and read it. I'm not going to read it because it's kind of lengthy, but that's the essence of what this post is about. He's actually quoting Diop, he's quoting Theophilo Benga criticizing Diop. There's nothing negative about it, nothing personal whatsoever. He's actually not even criticizing. He's criticizing some conclusions or things that Diop has assumed or claimed or hypothesized about, and Obenga is just simply readdressing them. And so you can read on your own. I'm not gonna read the whole thing, but it's a post he did about 2 hours ago. All right. So again, join our Facebook group. And if you have any questions that I might have missed on this video, or you watched the video or you're not watching live and you're actually watching this as an archive recording, join our Facebook group. Ask all the questions you want. If you need the document that I was showing you or any other documents that I mentioned but may not have shown or whatever the case is, just inbox me or join our group and ask. All right. I have tons of information. I think I have every single grammar that was ever produced about the Egyptian language, from Dutch to French to German, of course, in English. All right. Even in Chiluba and so on and so forth. Not necessarily grammar, but vocabulary lists and dictionaries, whether it's dictionaries, grammars, etc., resources, whatever it is. Like I said, I've been teaching this for over 7 years, going on 8. But I've been dealing with this for a lot longer. So I've collected a lot of material. You have to do literature review. You can't jump out the window and just start making claims without knowing what people have said about it already. What is the data? Where is the data? Okay. And it's to the point where, see, we as the Seshumani Metanetra, we deal with primaries. Like, we can question the dictionaries, whether certain words mean what they mean, because words on their own, there's not very much information you can get out of that. Context dictates meaning, how a word is used. This ties into semantics and pragmatics. You have to understand those two things that work together to understand meaning. And so in our journey, we're finding out that, some of these things don't mean what these Egyptologists say it meant. It's a very shallow way that they were interpreting these things. And then lastly, I want to say this. We have to understand, see, when people do the social racial thing, they are actually giving Europeans more sauce and giving more power to that than necessary. And it creates a situation where it's almost like a phobia, where it hinders your progress. Because people have a disdain for European this, that, and the third, that resources that are coming from Europeans, they fail to look into, they fail to collect, they fail to read. Why? Because why read it? It's coming from European. Oh, they got it wrong. Africans get it right all the time. Let's just deal with the Africans or people of African descent. See, that's the wrong attitude to have. That's unscientific. And especially with Egyptology, we have to understand that a tremendous amount of work was done by these early Egyptologists. Whether we like it or not, that is what's the reality that we face. We have people who wrote entire dictionaries. The biggest dictionary of Egyptian language is the Egyptian Wörterbuch Sprocket, or Sprach. A German dictionary that is handwritten All the glyphs are hand drawn. All the dictionary entries are handwritten. All the sources where you can find these words are handwritten. That means they had to find every word in an actual real primary text and write down where you can find it. Several volumes of this dictionary. Who else has done that? Like, name an African person of African descent that has matched that. And that's just one dictionary. You have Raymond Faulkner, who did the same thing. Hand wrote his dictionary. E.A. Wallace Budge has volumes and volumes and volumes of different books and texts. You have DeBuck, who hand drew a transcribed the hieratic text into the glyph form, Seshmetu form, the formal form, hand wrote it so that people could actually study the language. A lot of people who study the grammar use DeBuck's work in terms of exercises for the grammar. So, and I'm just naming a few. I mean, there's a whole bunch. There's a lot of people. You got Kurt Seth. You got Maspero. Who's another person? Carl Lepsius. Who else out there? All of these people. Now, do we take their word lock, stock, and barrel? No. But we would be foolish to just simply sweepingly dismiss whatever it is they do just because they're not of African descent. And that's where people go wrong. Anyway, I'm going to end this, and I'm going to say Shem Hotep. And again, join our Facebook group. If you got any questions, inbox me. My inbox is always open. At this point, there shouldn't be any question about the feminine plural. So I'm going to close with just a quick summary. Let's see if I can do this summary real quick. So remember this here. This is the morphological order. And this is the reason why scholars discuss the root of a word, or whether it's single or not, then whether it's plural or not, then its gender, and then duality. But on the subject of number, they're not going to discuss gender. So in the order of number, it's singular, then plural, then dual. Again, singular, plural, then dual. This is reflected in the declensional endings. Declension is a fancy word of saying the inflection of nouns and adjectives, which means how a word changes form in order to reflect grammatical features such as gender and number. For example, in English, it's very simple. If I say book, that's singular. If I say books, that's plural. I had to add an S on book to make it plural. That means I declined the singular form, book, with an S suffix to change it to books, plural. That's called declension. And so these words are declined in this order. The root, is it plural? What gender is it? Is it dual? That's the order of the flow. All right. And something else I want to show. And I'll probably be always doing this, something else. But I want to show this because this is important to understand. And this is something that will give insight to those who are learning the language. All right. I want to show this here. Let's see. Where is it? Okay, here we are. This is an example of a morphemic analysis. All right. And I want you all to understand, and hopefully you all understand. This is the word. This is a single word. This is one word. It's morphologically analyzed as it has a couple of morphemes in it. We have the word sejum, which means to hear. Okay. It means to hear or listen. We have in, which is a past tense morpheme. So we have here, we have a past tense morpheme that realizes itself as a water ripple, because this is sejum. The ear and the owl is the word sejum. The N is the concrete realization of this past tense morpheme, sejumin. Now, this horned viper here, this horned viper is one glyph that visually represents three morphemes. It represents third person, it represents masculine, and it represents number. So this one glyph is representing person, gender, and number. Person, gender, and number at the same time. And we call that a portmanteau morpheme. And what that means is it's combining two or more morphemes into one morph. So these are three morphemes and one morph that you actually see. And in this case, that you would hear. Sejuminef. Sejuminef. It means he heard, past tense. This one word translates as two words in English. Okay? So I'm showing this because when I had spoke on this here, when you have the root, and then whether it's plural or not, then the gender, then the duality of a word, you'll understand that the WY in this example is an ending for dual. The TY together is an ending for dual on the feminine side. And so it makes perfect sense, and it flows, and it's logically sound and consistent once you understand and study the grammar. And again, don't allow people who do not study the grammar, do not study the language, and halfway do these kinds of things dictate what's what and what to focus on. Don't fall for the distractions. Don't fall for the banana in the tailpipe. No matter how much they kick, scream, and beg for a debate, or act like they debated and won a debate because some of their friends want to pat them on the back to validate their 2 years of studying to finally be able to point out certain things. Don't fall for that. All right. Go to competent teachers, people who can explain things that can break them down in a logical way, who understand the jargon, understand the words, use the words properly, and can explain the words with ease. Those are the people that you want to befriend and deal with. And overall, don't believe anybody. Gain the necessary tools of discernment so that you can discern for yourself, and look out for those people who teach in that way. Like the way I teach, I don't teach people to hold on to my words. Don't believe what I'm saying. I equip you with the tools so that you can discern for yourself. You understand? Because one day you can come back and check behind me and correct me, because I'm not infallible. I can make mistakes, and I don't know everything. I know what I know, but I don't know everything. And I share what I know, and I develop a method of sharing what I know in a capacity of a teacher. So it's just simple as that. And so with that, I'm going to say Shem Hotep, and I'll look forward to any questions that people may have in the comments after the video, and so on and so forth. Join the group. And also, what I haven't done is was showing you, and I don't even have it up. But if you're interested in learning the language, this Sunday, we're starting a brand new season on a beginner's level of live interactive sessions. And so we're opening it up to everybody, anybody who's ever taken a class with me or with us ever, and those people who are new and want to learn for the first time. It's open. You can go to Sable University that you see here. As a matter of fact, let me just make sure that it could be seen. If you see this website here, sableuniversity.com, go there, and you'll be able to register. Look for the Beginner's Introduction to Meta Nature, or the Beginner's Introduction to Egyptian Hieroglyphic. Register and enroll, and you'll be good to go. The way that the course is designed is that you can learn on your own pace. You have to have the textbook, of course, but you can learn at your own pace. The live interactive sessions are designed to walk through the chapters in a sequential order. So the first week, it's going to be several sessions in that week, all dealing with chapter 1. Next week be chapter 2, and so on and so forth. So you could jump in anytime. Anything you need help on, any questions you need answered, and everything. It's there for you, available for you. All right. So remember that. And with that, I will say Shalom Hotep.